Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is February 5th, 2026. We are 271 days away from the election. I think that's right. Not like I'm counting or anything, but things are happening. Things are taking off. There's a lot happening in the news. Some of the priorities that we've been working on had their bill hearings this week. We have a great guest tonight, Andrew Eneim, who is a friend of the campaign, is going to be on the staff of the campaign, and has done a lot of great organizing. And, we missed last week. It was actually really nice to have the day off. I think both Owen and I weren't feeling very good, and it was just a good time to be able to take a night off. So I'm sorry to all the folks who wanted to see the show last week. We're just two guys who do this in our time as much as we can. We all both have other jobs, and we both have other things that we're trying to do, and sometimes stuff happens, but we are excited that you're here with us tonight, and I think we've got a great show. How you doing, Owen?
Yeah, I'm feeling better. I had that cold that was going around, but similarly to you, Andy, I saw someone reacted with a shocked face when we canceled last week. So I was like, oh no, I let people down. But I think, self-care is important. Rest is important. We've got, 270 days to go. So got to save some of our strength and heal up and keep it moving.
Yeah, look, we're not going to try to make a habit of it, but at the same time, we're not going to be too upset. If one of us doesn't feel good or both of us doesn't feel good, we're going to take the day, as we get closer to the election, things will get more stressed. But when we're still 270 days out, if we have those days, we're going to take them. But, I'm glad we did that. But I'm so excited to do the show we have tonight. There's a lot to talk about. Having Andrew on is going to be really good. And I think, many things that we've been talking about in theory up until this point are really starting to swing into action. A lot is happening in the world. A lot is happening in the legislature. And, yesterday, one of the things that we've talked about a whole lot, HB 101, had its hearing in the House. And, so a lot to cover tonight. I think the Olympics start tomorrow. We were talking about how Seth, who was on a couple of weeks ago, and I are very big Olympics fans, so I'm excited about that. But, that starts tomorrow. Tonight we're here, and let's get to it. Anything you want to say before we dive into what's been happening?
No, I think it's a good time to start talking about civic engagement and public television. So this is something that, like many parts of our campaign, if you had asked me, 6 months or 9 months ago, hey, would we be really focused on public television or public media? I'd say, oh, well, it's important, but it's not a centerpiece of the campaign. But it's really become important, and especially as it relates to civic engagement and grassroots democracy, which is a pillar of the Green Party's values. So what's going on with our platform in that area, Andy?
Yeah, so I think there's two pieces to this that I want to talk about. First is last week, we released a new plank of our civic engagement platform that talks about the way that we see public television as a key part of that civic engagement. Public television is in Maryland Public Television is the only statewide news network. It's the only network that has reach across the state. And it's the only network that is charged by the state of Maryland with working in the public interest in order to make sure that viewers are informed about what's happening. So last week, we rolled out a policy that responds to federal budget cuts to Maryland Public Television and to public broadcasting in general by doubling in the first year and then quadrupling after that the amount of funding that they get. Wes Moore and his budget kept the line basically the same for public television, about $13.9 million in operating expenses, and he shifted a couple of dollars around so state agencies are paying more advertising dollars to public television. But, if you look at the Trump administration, who has attacked public television across the board because they think it's too woke and it promotes liberal values and things like that, they have attacked it, they've defunded it, and it's particularly hit Maryland Public Television. And so I was kind of surprised to see the governor's budget basically keep the operating budget flat. And when we saw that, we realized, it is important to signal our values with our budgets. And one of the ways to do that is to say we value public television as a source of information, as a source of civic engagement. So we would double the budget in the first year and quadruple it the year after that. The other part to that is we really think that public television in Maryland already plays a vital role in talking about local and state news. But we want to see that expanded so that there's more coverage of things like school board meetings, city council meetings, and what is happening in the General Assembly. We think that's a really useful way to make sure that people across the state of Maryland have access to a non-corporately purchased or a non-corporately run, media outlet. And one of the things that we would like to see them do as well is expand their coverage of particular political viewpoints. Right now, they cover caucuses, legislative caucuses. So if the Republican caucus wanted to have a program on public broadcasting, they could. If the rural caucus wanted to, they could. And we think that should be expanded to cover parties as well. In the UK and Canada and a lot of other countries, parties get to have access to public television. And we think that that's a valuable way for parties who are part of the civic infrastructure to be able to express their values and express their ideas. So we rolled that out last week. I'm excited to talk about more of the way that we think the public television is part of the cornerstone of civic engagement in the state of Maryland over the next few weeks and months. I'm excited about that piece of it.
Yeah, there's been a deterioration of public infrastructure, certainly of media infrastructure, and of places for people to gather and talk about the issues of the day, union halls and so forth. And I think that this is really important, that we strengthen the public television, the public media that we have in our state, to not just to maintain funding in the face of fascists at the federal level slashing funding, but to really grow it. And I think it's consistent with growing funding for libraries, which is another one of those places where it's open to the community, can be used for multiple purposes, and at its heart, it's about education and the public good.
Yeah, and I was at this Forward Party of Maryland event the other day where they were having some volunteers and some porters come out. And I think I was having a conversation that involved people of all sorts of different political affiliations and approaches. And one of the things that we all had in common was that when we were young, we learned to appreciate news and public affairs programming by watching public television. It was kind of like that Spider-Man meme where everybody's pointing at each other. Because one of us sort of said, I used to watch the McNeil Lehrer News Hour, and I used to watch this PBS programming. And everybody's like, me too. And I think there is a degree to which the ability to watch an independent broadcaster who is not controlled by corporations lay out the news helps folks to be independent of the polarization that we see today. And look, we have our criticisms of the way the public television runs now. We'll talk a little bit about that in the next section, I think. But it is useful to know that people who are independent-minded oftentimes turn to public television because they believe that it has the interest of the public and not of the shareholders in mind.
Yeah. And when we think of some of the things that are most frustrating about the kind of attention as currency way that social media and corporate media work with, clickbait and trying to keep you glued to the screen for as long as possible, and these quick hits of dopamine. Public media isn't like that, right? It's about telling stories. It's long form. It's issues that no one else is covering in many cases, and it's told from a local community or state level, and it's not totally based on ratings and advertising dollars and all these things.
Yeah, totally. And, I think as we put it in the press release that we put out last week to talk about this, the best way to fight against the attack on public television is to expand the people that public television serves and to enmesh it in our democracy so it is an important part of what we are doing and how people understand it, So I think that it was, public television is an important piece of our platform, is an important piece of civic engagement, and it is something that we will focus on going forward.
Yeah, and it would be exciting to see what they could do with more resources. I was reading this piece about how the youngest generation has the idea of culture in 2016 has been trending, and some media scholars were theorizing that, well, that was the last time when most people had TV, and people could watch these mega events all at the same time instead of the YouTubeification of entertainment, and everyone was watching different things at different times, and everything was on demand at all times. So yeah, strengthening MPT and seeing how it could grow in the future with more resources could help bring us back to this idea of having a shared thing to pay attention to and hold our attention.
We can
But
only hope.
yeah. Yeah. So what about, that was last week. This week we had a bill hearing for our bill, which is related to Maryland Public Television. I mean, it's not really a dotted line. It's a straight line between, wanting to better fund this institution and also expecting it to better serve its purpose of informing Marylanders and being accountable to the community. And so HB 101, we've been talking about it for weeks, if not months on this show, is a bill that Andy and I have been involved with and in coalition on that would condition state funding for public media on inclusion of all candidates in the general election debates for statewide office. So it was a big day yesterday. It was the bill hearing. So set the scene for a little bit, for us a little bit, Andy. A lot of folks who, even if they pay attention to politics, aren't able, for one reason or another, to go down to Annapolis as much as you do, to go down to the General Assembly. What's it like? What's an average day like for an advocate in Annapolis? Before we get to this specific day, kind of set the scene. What's it like in the room, in the building?
So first of all, it depends. Sometimes, or often in the afternoon, 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, these committees will have bill hearings. And bill hearings mean that a bill comes up, the sponsor reads the bill. If they're supporters of the bill, they get to read some testimony. The committee that focuses, in this case, on government, labor, and elections gets to ask questions. And usually what will happen is the sponsor of the bill will have a panel that they bring up. And that's where the questions will be directed. Those are really the sort of advocates, the experts, the people directly affected by the things who are speaking about it. And then the General Assembly is open for anybody to testify on any bill. So there will oftentimes be other people who support a bill, either in person or virtually. There's also people who will suggest the bill should be amended, and there's sometimes people who oppose a bill. And oftentimes the opposition comes from lobby groups or trade groups or things like that who don't like the way a certain thing is being done. So yesterday was a long day of bill hearings in the Government, Labor, and Elections Committee. And almost all of the bills focused on how to make sure that as many people as possible could vote as easily as possible, and understand the ways and means that they go about voting, and that we can expand that as broadly as possible. So it was a good day for us to be in that committee because it was about access to the ballot. It was about keeping people informed, and it was about making sure that everybody has the information. Our bill was like the 12th bill to be heard in the day. So by the time we got to, I think we started at 2 o'clock. By the time we got to our bill, it was probably 5 o'clock or so. It was a long day hanging out with the same people, kind of like, a training day, or like being on a plane with a train car with a group of people you like, or something like that. I don't know. It's a very unique setting, but our bill was the last of the day. And I think it went great. we don't know if this bill is going to pass this year. We think that there's some chance that we can, take advantage of the opportunity that is presented to get all candidates on the ballot on the debate stage. But, it's politics. There's a lot going on. This is not really the top of mind of most of the people in Maryland. But we had a very good panel for our bill. Delegate Simmons introduced it. I gave my testimony. Joanne Antoine from Common Cause, Nikki from League of Women Voters, and Davon Love from Leaders of Beautiful Struggle were on our panel. And we testified, and we got some hard questions about the bill.
Before you go on, Andy, just so that folks kind of understand, can you explain, what kind of strategic thinking, part of this idea of this campaign is developing capacity for radical policy work around the state of Maryland. So what strategic thinking went into putting those people together, building that coalition, saying these are the right people to testify on the sponsors panel, right? And like you said, anyone can sign up to testify for, against, or favorable with amendments, or opposed. But what's the strategy behind building a really strong? I did this in 2024 with a bill that I worked on. I can talk a little bit about my thoughts on that, but I'm curious, how did you and other folks in this coalition go about building this coalition and then deciding here are the key folks that should be on this panel?
Yeah, so some of it is the people who are interested in participating in it, but others of it are people whose organizations are value aligned with things like making sure that voters have all the information needed. And so, Common Cause is one of the leading pro-democracy groups here working in the General Assembly in Maryland. The League of Women Voters is a national organization that is always making sure that people feel that people are informed and have access. The League of Women Voters also sponsors a lot of forums and has historically been part of that effort. So I think they were able to lend their experience with that. Common Cause was able to lend their experience as a pro-government or as a good governance, pro-democracy organization. And
Common Cause kind of come out of the Nader's Raiders movement. Am I getting that right, or are they separate from that?
I don't know, but I think they're part of that good government effort to make sure that there's transparency, clarity, and good democracy. And we've been able to work with them on a lot of things at the state level. Yeah. And then Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle is a Black grassroots think tank who has increasingly been calling on both parties to better meet the needs of Black working class folks. And if they don't, have been advocating for alternatives to that. And so that panel, I think, sort of strikes a balance of people who believe that there need to be more folks on the stage. And they were, very good panel. And we got some tough questions. Delegate Stewart from Montgomery County really had concerns about the bill's constitutional viability. I think he maybe overplayed those concerns a little bit, but I think we'll find out from the Attorney General what they think about the state trying to set the very narrow terms of who gets to be on the debate stage in a taxpayer-funded debate. Our point through almost all of this is that the public interest and the voters' interest is served when they get to see every candidate on their ballot who is, they get to hear from their taxpayer-funded network from every candidate on their ballot. Now, I think we had a good interchange. I think there was a good exchange on that. There were some, industry support folks that testify on behalf of the media industry and their lawyers who came and testified and said that they should not have to do this. And I think it's important to note that none of those folks made a comment at all about why the current policy of excluding anybody but the two parties is good. They just made the argument that they were offended that we would suggest that, they had to do this.
Yeah. And I ran into that a little bit in 2024 when I was working on a immigrant justice higher education bill, right? The lobbyists that represented the private universities. It wasn't so much that they were terribly against our new idea, but they were very much against the state government telling them what to do about anything. And that came out a little bit in Delegate Stewart's line of questioning about, well, what about this other, wacky thing we could tell them to do, right? Which kind of sounded like it could have been coming from a industry lobbyist talking point. which is, I don't know if it's a red herring or something, but it's like, okay, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about this other very narrow thing over here. And so I think there are a lot, whether it's, private TV companies and radio stations who are the majority of people represented by these lobbyists, or it's private universities. What they really don't want is state government telling them what to do about anything. And they may have some legit specific concerns about whatever the bill is, but I think their initial posture is let us do whatever we want and stay out of our business.
Yeah. And you know what? Like, I don't think that the majority of broadcasters have in their mission to serve the public interest like public broadcasting does. And I think this bill is very narrowly tailored in order to say that instead of getting to select to exclude certain candidates from the debate stage, which is a partisan act on their part, it's bipartisan, but it is still partisan because they always exclude anybody who's not a Democrat or a Republican given their current standards. That's fine, whatever. Their lobbyists can defend that. And I want to say, I've known Delegate Stewart since he was running for office. He and I and several other folks on that committee were in a training together with Step Up Maryland in 2018. And I believe that he believes in the Constitution. And I believe he had real concerns that the committee might be undertaking something that has constitutional concerns. We'll get an answer to that. But I think that what he also suggested that was important was that he agrees with us that there's a problem and that the committee should have a role in solving it. So you asked earlier about legislative strategy. A lot of times when a bill gets introduced in Annapolis, the first year, it's to suss out arguments, to suss out support and things like that. Very rarely passes in the first year. People have to understand the position. People have to understand where they are on it. And I think that what I took away from the exchange with Delegate Stewart is that there's a really good opportunity to work with him in the future, even if this bill doesn't pass, to address the problem, because he concretely agreed that this was a problem that should be addressed. And, I'll take that as a win. We'll see what the Attorney General says about the constitutionality of the way that we're doing it this year, and we'll move forward.
Yeah. Yeah. I think also the other interesting moment from one of the panelists was, we weren't sure how some of the more conservative members or the Republicans would respond. And Delegate Fisher kind of said, Andy, there's YouTube. Why don't you host your own debate? And I'm sure the Republican candidate, whoever it is, would be willing to debate you. So I thought, policy over here, but this is also politics, right? We're doing both things at once, policy and politics. And I thought Delegate Fisher's comment was, thoughtful and helpful for us politically.
I thought so too. And I think it was because I answered, sure, I'll debate any of them. Now, I'm not sure that John Myrick and Dan Cox and Ed Hale are real excited that the chair of the House Freedom Caucus invited them to debate me on somebody's YouTube channel, but the invitation is open. If any of those Republican candidates, or if Wes Moore or anybody else who's running for governor wants to have a debate, we don't have to wait till the MPT debate stage. We can have that debate on YouTube. We can have that debate in person, whatever. I think debate is a part of civic engagement, and I think it's something that we should absolutely engage in, regardless of whether it's on public television. Now, I think the point that we were making in the hearing yesterday is public television has a unique responsibility to inform voters and to be part of a civic education and civic engagement process. And that is what we are pressing on, because it is the only broadcaster that has access across the state of Maryland for free and can reach every part of the state. And we think that every voter needs to know who the voters are or who the candidates on their ballot are before they go into the ballot box. It's almost hurting those candidates to not include. It's not just not including them, it's delegitimizing them. And so if I'm an MPT watcher and I watch and I see that the debate only has the Democrat and the Republican, and then I see a Green and a Libertarian, I assume that those candidates are not legitimate. That is a partisan act that our taxpayer station should not be engaging in. And we're going to win this fight one way or another.
Yeah. And I thought Nikki from League of Women Voters made that point quite personally and convincingly when she said that watching a debate that included all of the candidates led her to vote for a candidate from a party other than the one she usually votes for is affiliated with. So I thought that's the crux of it, right? Is that when a voter gets to see all of their choices, gets to hear from all of the candidates and decide which one is most aligned with their priorities and their values, sometimes they change their mind, and sometimes they don't. But they should have that opportunity, and there should be more transparency and inclusivity in our public debates. So, yeah,
and that's the reason, like, the lobbying organizations that are paid by the corporate media understand very well that when people see additional choices, they will vote outside of the two-party system. And they are protected by the two-party system because the two-party system allows the corporate media that pays for their organizations to be able to exist. So I understand the self-interest of the lobby of the organizations that were testifying against this, and we'll work this out with them. This is the process. They have a legitimate spot there, we have a legitimate spot there too, and we'll work it out. Some of it is negotiated, some of it is agree to disagree, and some of it is point fingers at each other and say you're the bad guy.
Yeah, but it was a good day for the campaign. I think it was a good day for democracy, and it raises the salience and the visibility of the issue of the exclusion of smaller parties from the mainstream discourse. And that's what this campaign is all about, is for fighting our way into the conversation and bringing really good solutions to the problems that folks are facing all across the state with us, because the corporate funded candidates won't raise those issues the way we will.
Before we move on to I want to switch topics here in a second, but I do want to take two of the questions that Interlude has in here about these things. One of them is about ranked choice voting. Next Wednesday in the House, that same committee, there will be a hearing on ranked choice voting bills. I'll be submitting testimony for that, and I'll be there on Wednesday to report on that as well. So we will talk about some of the ranked choice voting bills that are in the General Assembly probably next week. And there's also another question about the Green Party in the UK. Absolutely. The Green Party in the UK is doing excellent work with media. And one of the ways that the Green Party in the UK can do excellent work in media is that they have party broadcasting time on the BBC and on other public networks. That's a model for what we need to be looking at here. We need to look at how the UK and Canada and other countries use public broadcasters in order to make sure that parties can get professional, well-produced messages out to the widest audience. And that's a great example of how it works. So great questions on that.
Yeah, great question, Antelude. My aunt, who's the first person who told me about the Green Party like 20 years ago, sent me a Guardian article today about the UK Green Party, and they said something like, we feel like we're a startup that's been around for a while, and suddenly we're like growing really quickly, and we have the capacity for a 50,000 person organization, and now we're 200, 300,000. And so I think I can kind of relate to that. We're building the capacity for a campaign that is growing faster than we expected. So usually we save this for the end, but if you want to chip in and help us grow this campaign and grow the capacity of our campaign, please contribute. GoGreen2026.com/donate. So let's get into the week in review, the news, right? There's a lot happening right now. And I think we can start. We're going to start.
Yeah, let's start with ICE and immigration. So this week, a lot happened on this front in the state of Maryland. The Maryland General Assembly, House and the Senate, both passed bills that would ban the 287G agreements and stop ICE officers from being able to wear masks. And so we've talked about these some. We think that these are pieces of legislation that will be very interesting. They are moving very quickly on it because I think they have at least some concern based on Wes Moore's national aspirations that he might veto some of these bills. And so they're trying to get them passed as soon as they can so that they can get sent to the governor. And if he does veto it, they have a chance to override it. There's a weird quirk in how laws work in Maryland, that if there is a veto in the year before an election, there's no opportunity for an override the next year. So they're pushing these bills really quickly in order to make sure that if he vetoes it, they have a chance to overturn it. This is happening in a backdrop of two facilities that are being proposed in the state of Maryland, two massive detention facilities that ICE has bought from private contractors, one in Howard County and one in Washington County. There's a hearing going on right now, I believe, in Howard County about whether they're going to ban this facility that is a massive ICE warehouse that will be a detention facility. People say it is a detention facility for immigrants. I don't know that it will just be a detention facility for immigrants. If we watch what happened in Minnesota, they're detaining a lot of people, and they're detaining people who are protesting. I think some of the signs are coming that Baltimore may get Baltimore, Maryland, Prince George's County, Montgomery County may get the Minneapolis treatment pretty soon. ICE has been here for a long time. We've talked on this show about how ICE has killed people here in the state of Maryland, or shot people here in the state of Maryland, and has been active for a while. But this context creates a really interesting political situation and a really dangerous on the ground situation that I think we're going to be talking about a lot over the next month or so. But I wanted to get your quick opinion on what you think about what we are seeing right now on this.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that centrist Democrats don't go out of their way to support marginalized communities. And that really was driven home for me in 2018, 2019, when I was part of some organizing to get Howard County, including the same county executive that they have now, Dr. Calvin Ball, to stop coordinating with ICE. They had one of these agreements, and they were actually using their county jail to hold immigrants pre-deportation. And there was a lot of behind the scenes pressure and advocacy and lobbying. And there were a lot of people in the Democratic establishment in Howard County who were pushing back and defending the county executive's position that this was a model facility and that they were very nice to the people they were keeping in cages there before deporting them. And it took a massive protest, which included direct action, people linking arms and blocking the driveway of the jail in order to eventually get him to change his position. So I don't think it should be assumed that Governor Moore will, sign this legislation banning these agreements between local sheriffs and local counties and ICE just because he's a Democrat, just because he has a D next to his name, just because he said some pro-immigrant things in the past. I think organizations and activists who care about immigrants' rights should be thinking about an escalation plan and should be at the very least signaling that they're willing to escalate, because if they don't, it might be easier for him politically to veto one out of these bills. And we saw that from the governor of New Jersey. One of his last acts in office was to veto 2 out of 3 immigration pro-immigrant bills that the state legislature there had passed.
Right. And I mean, it's astounding to me that we're in a moment where the Democratic governor of Maryland in a deep blue state that is also a very black and brown state, would consider vetoing this legislation. But we know Wes Moore is always looking at the polls and always looking at the way that the national winds blow. And I wouldn't be surprised if we have a shocking veto coming up sometime in this month, just like we did last year with data center research and climate studies and reparations. So we'll keep an eye on that. It probably won't happen. But I want to say, even if he signs these bills, the real problem for me here is this should have been done at least last year. And probably, you said you've been working on this for 8 years, right? At this point. And so when Bill Ferguson and the Senate President Bill Ferguson and the Democrats in Annapolis undermined this policy last year. Last year, there was a bill that would have ended these 287G agreements. And on the last day of the General Assembly, in the last hour, he pulled it out of the legislation and passed a very watered down version of it. So they're all going to celebrate signing it and passing it this year. But I want him to go tell every one of those families who had somebody deported as a result of a county that was cooperating in a 287G agreement over the last year, that he needed to do this for political reasons, or at least explain himself. We know the answer. We know why he did it. He felt like the polls weren't on his side and the Democrats weren't fully aligned on this. He was wrong. He gambled, and he gambled with people's families and people's lives. And I think that even if this bill passes this year, we need to make sure that the Democrats who made those decisions, not all of them, many of them supported doing this policy last year, the year before, and the year before that. But the ones in power who made this decision need to be held accountable, and people need to remind them that that decision that they made directly hurt people, directly hurt families, and directly led to deportations of people to who knows where. And so, sometimes you'll hear these stories and they'll say, well, this isn't the year we can do it. Every time they do that, somebody suffers, and they need to be held accountable for it. And a state as deep blue as Maryland, with as many black and brown voters as there are, and as the size of immigrant communities that it has, it should be unacceptable that a person like Bill Ferguson is still in power after doing that to this bill last year.
Yeah. They let the problem get worse. They let more counties sign these agreements. There were only 2 or 3 for a long time. They could have nipped it in the bud, and the problem got worse and worse and worse. And now maybe if there's enough pressure brought to bear, they'll solve this one very small part, this very easily solvable part of what is a national disaster made by the bipartisan political system. So. So let's talk about the other major development recently, which is the last cycle, Dan Cox was the Republican gubernatorial candidate, and he kind of hopped back into the race, the Republican primary this year. So what's going on with that from your perspective, Andy?
So Dan Cox is a MAGA Republican who, took gifts from Proud Boys on stage, who rented buses for January 6th, who doesn't believe there should be income taxes, who believes we should ban abortion without exception, who doesn't believe in public school. He's the most radical person that could have possibly run on the Republican ticket and got the nomination in 2022. And he did, and then he lost by 32 points. The race wasn't close at all in 2022 because despite 8 years of Larry Hogan, a Republican, being the governor, Dan Cox went in an entirely different direction and appealed to the MAGA base of the party. 32 points. Wes Moore had 64 points. Dan Cox, the Libertarian, the Green, and the Working Class Party candidate were closer to Dan Cox than Dan Cox was to Wes Moore. And so we're from Baltimore City. We're used to the Republican Party really being a third party with a major party label. And I think that in 2022, Dan Cox brought that energy to the governor's race. And I think if he gets the nomination, and I assume he has to be the front runner at this point, given that we have more money than the rest of the Republicans in the field, according to the last campaign finance thing, I assume that means that Dan Cox is going to be the nominee. Now, we'll see. There's other people that could get in the race. Ed Hale could finally wake up and start being impressive. Other stuff could happen. But if Dan Cox is the nominee of the Republican Party again in 2026, that is excellent for an opportunity to build a green, independent left movement, which really challenges the two-party system that we have right now. It's not just the Democrats that are the problem. It's the Republicans who try to hold a monopoly on being an opposition party. And if Dan Cox is the nominee, it will be a great opportunity to make the case that Maryland needs more opposition parties because the Republicans aren't doing it, and they're nominating non-viable candidates who appeal to the fringe of their base. Dan Cox is 32 points. in the last election were a result of having the R next to his name. If he did the honorable thing and went and formed a Freedom Party or a Patriot Party or something like that, he might get 3, 4, 5, 6%. He could be the best third party governor in a long time if he ran that way. But as long as he's running in the Republican Party, he's going to demonstrate the need for there to be multi-party democracy and reforms that allow there to be multiple opposition parties, because the Republicans aren't it. We have a great press release on this. We'll include it in the show notes and things like that. I'm sure there will be more to talk about this, because Dan Cox is the gift that keeps on giving to anybody he's running against. And there'll be more to talk about this, but it is news and it is important.
And it links back to our focus on opening up the debates, right? Because does NPT or do some of these other organizations really want to do just like a replay? 4 years later, now Governor Moore has $6 or $8 million in his campaign war chest. It's only going to be more lopsided in some ways than it was then. Why give Marylanders a rerun of a debate? Why not open it up to all the candidates who are in the debate? So I think it also strengthens our case that all candidates, regardless of kind of arbitrary viability metrics that an editorial board might impose, all candidates who are on the general election ballot should be in the race, because Dan Cox is not viable either.
Right. Dan Cox is no more likely to win the election than we are. Right. He may get more points, but he's not any more likely to win. And look, I don't want to count these chickens before they're hatched. There's a long race to come, and I don't want to only paint the rosiest best path of it. And so we should talk about other scenarios in the future. But if Dan Cox is the nominee, it's probably very good for us.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's worth mentioning that, had Hogan or had any of the Republicans really been, fundraising, and except for maybe one of them really been campaigning around the state, it would be a more challenging argument for us to make the case to some members of the progressive, big tent progressive movement. And if it's Cox and Moore again, it's very easy to make the case, hey, vote with your values, vote for your policy priorities, and vote for us, because it's going to be another blowout.
Yeah. Yep. Excellent weekend review. Excellent discussion of democracy and civic engagement. I want to bring in Andrew Eneim. He's a longtime Green Party member and labor organizer. He was a leader in the graduate student unionization efforts at Johns Hopkins. He's joining the campaign as their people organizer. And he's going to help us build out the grassroots capacity to do everything we were just talking about. So it's not just Owen and I. We're not just we're not just a think tank and a live stream and some policy advocates. We're an actual campaign that's out there engaging with people and making connections and building the power we need for grassroots democracy. And with that, I want to bring on Andrew. Welcome, Andrew. How are you doing tonight?
Good. Excited to be here. And really happy to have a chat.
Okay. Before we get to the chat, you're going to get this. Excellent. We got to do that for every now and then when we have the guests on, because we do applaud you and we're happy that you're here and we're happy that we get a chance to talk to you. So I'm really excited to have this conversation tonight. Thank you for joining us. Owen, why don't you get us started off?
Yeah, so Andy read your fancy bio, but tell us a little bit more, about yourself and why you're a Green.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Southern California all my life. Went to college there and came to Baltimore, where I live now, to get a doctorate, and then discovered how much of what I think my actual calling in this life is organizing and not doing science in a lab all the time, which is a totally fine thing to experience when you're, coming in at 22 and have no idea what to do with your life. So, I think for me, my sort of journey to becoming a Green, I have never voted in a presidential election that didn't have Donald Trump on the ballot. It's never happened. The entire time, my first election was 2016. every presidential election since then has had that as the lesser evil, right? And I hear a lot of this talk about like, oh, if only we could go back to 2016, before all this started. And frankly, what was happening before that is what caused it. This is a system that sort of rolled out the red carpet for someone like Trump to gain traction and appeal to the worst in people, but the reason being that people are hurting and people need an alternative, and they need something that's not the status quo. And so I'm agreeing because I believe in the values of the party, and I also see that the difficulty in being able to maintain an independent party like this for so long speaks to sort of the deep commitment that a lot of the organizers past and present have. And I hope to sort of contribute to that and the growth of other independent parties as well, not just Greens.
Yeah. And, I think it's really important to ask that question. How did you decide to do this thing that is very hard and feels like it is oftentimes unlikely to succeed because it is fighting against the toughest systems? And I appreciate hearing that origin story in that broader context. Also, on a more following on tune or on the line of what we were talking about before, you did some organizing for some legislation that was in Annapolis this week. HB 120 is a bill that you prepared testimony for with a group of folks at Hopkins, and we released a statement on it. Our statement will be in the show notes, but I want to let you talk about what HB 120 was, your organizing on it, and the position you took.
Yeah. So a group of Hopkins grad students have periodically done sort of Hill Days in DC where, they're scientists using their expertise to inform policy. And this year, that group, who I've known about for some time, but here and there kind of went to events, they were like, we want to go to the State House and we want to influence policy there. Someone reached out to me. They knew I had done stuff in the State House before and I knew about Maryland politics. And I was like, yeah, absolutely, I'm in. And one of the things we wanted to work on was regulating AI and AI data centers in particular, which HB 120 is about. And for those that aren't familiar, the thing that powers ChatGPT and other AI, a lot of that is a giant warehouse of computers that are able to do all of these things that can produce us the fancy Google a lot of the times. So I know we all do it sometimes. And one of the downsides of this is that they're very consuming of energy. They're consuming of fresh water. They're big polluters. And we've seen the worst of what happens in Memphis. There's a bunch of data centers in Virginia. And they're placed near communities. And they cause sort of crazy health detriments. And this is something that's coming to Maryland. There's tons of proposals across the state to build these data centers. And people across the state are pretty frustrated by it. And a lot of the organizing has been within those counties. And they're saying, hey, county officials, reverse this approval or delay this or actually let us have input. But there hasn't really been a lot on the state level. And so HB 120 was introduced. It was introduced by the Republican Freedom Caucus. So they have ulterior motives as far as I can tell. But essentially what it would do is it would place a moratorium on data center construction in the state, but it would allow for the construction to go forward if they are required to be located on the same site as a gas plant or a nuclear plant or a small energy reactor. So they are trying to find a way to bring more gas plants into the state and pollute the environment more, or bring rushed building of nuclear plants to get these data centers online. That could be incredibly unsafe because their motive is not one driven by let's protect people from pollution. It's, well, let's just make sure that the energy bills don't go up and I can get reelected. So we submitted testimony on this bill. We were in support of the moratorium, but we submitted an amendment. So we basically said strip out the co-location, the gas plants, the nuclear plants, just put a moratorium, because that's the only bill that's actually addressing this in the legislature this year. There are a lot of other things that need to be addressed about how these data centers are going to impact people in this state. We don't have transparency about how they're actually going to interact with, are they actually going to build it with labor from in the state? Is it going to be unionized labor? Is it going to be workers that they bring in from other places? Are there going to be permanent jobs that actually stay for people? These are arguments that all of these companies are using about, we're going to bring jobs, we're going to bring revenue, but there's no actual guarantees that any of these things they're saying are true. And so there's a lot that has to be done. And so, we were in support of the moratorium part, right? Because the legislature is not dealing with it right now. And so if they're not going to deal with it and they're not going to make sure we do this right, we need to stop, and we need to not allow this to happen until we can actually put in the time and the effort to figure out how actually are we going to regulate this industry to make sure that Marylanders benefit and are not adversely impacted. Because once they're built and once these plants are online, one, they're a lot harder to get rid of, and two, the damage will be done by the time that we get back to it. And so that's sort of the summary of that fight. And the hearing happened. It was sort of it was an interesting hearing, I would say, of the consensus sort of being, we got to make sure the energy bills don't go up, and that's sort of the only thing that matters. So it was clear to me that the consensus here is, let's just make sure we get reelected because the energy bills don't get up, and not thinking through, there's a lot of things we need to deal with. And yes, it's new technology, AI, and it's like really growing, and these data centers are relatively new. That doesn't mean we should shy away from taking a look at it and actually investigating how should we do this right.
Yeah, and one of the things I think is most interesting about this is the far right Freedom Caucus and Governor Westmore have come to a convergence on this question of co-location. So earlier on the show back in 2025, we talked about how Governor Moore and 3 other governors on behalf of the data center lobby went to the regional grid operator with a proposal for co-location. And he too wants gas plants next to the data center. I mean, to the Freedom Caucus's credit, they are at least calling for a moratorium until that co-location occurs. When Governor Moore signed the critical infrastructure bill in 2024, he touted it as supercharging the data center industry in the state. And so I think this is one of those places, we're not saying both parties are the same, but we're highlighting a place where both parties agree. Both parties, the far right side of the Republican caucus in the House of Delegates and Governor Moore, agree that we should build gas plants next to the data centers. And to me, that's because they're thinking about it through a lens of energy bills, not through an environmental justice and environmental racism lens. We can see from places like Curtis Bay and other places across the state what happens when we co-locate fossil fuel infrastructure in people's neighborhoods. It increases cancer rates, it increases asthma rates, and increases toxic material that people have to deal with. And it is often going to be in the communities that can least organize in order to resist this type of thing coming into their community.
Yeah, so definitely. And if one were a corporate lobbyist working for the data center industry, I mean, this would be the strategy, right? To have the far right propose this kind of, controversial moratorium with a big loophole in it, and have the governor try to supercharge the industry without a moratorium, and really splinter any kind of traditional left, right, red, blue coalition from forming against it. So it seems like they're both not even playing into the hands of, they're both, I think,
working for the lobby.
They're working for the lobby, just in different ways. And
one last thing before we get to the next question. At the beginning, Owen, you were asking what it's like in Annapolis. And this hearing was fascinating because this hearing was not necessarily super well orchestrated. It was also at the end of the day. And what ended up happening was Delegate Fisher, who we mentioned earlier in our panel, who is the chair of the Freedom Caucus in the House, got up and read the bill. And like 3 people who could not agree with him less got up and were on his panel, and they were either opposed or favorable with the amendment. They were all taking positions similar to what Andrew's organization took, which was to call for a to call for just the moratorium and not the other pieces. And so you got this guy who's far right Freedom Caucus guy up there sort of reading the bill, and the panel that looks like is his panel is like, we are, you know, democratic socialists fighting against the data center, or we are environmentalists fighting against the data center. It was one of those things where it's a reminder that some of this stuff is well orchestrated and well put together, but some of it is like real kind of the basic nuts and bolts of government don't always operate with high dollar orchestration and things like that. Sometimes it's the end of a day and please just come up here and say your 2 minutes so that we can go home. You know, so I thought that part was interesting. Watching the hearing was fascinating because it was like, these are people who would never be anywhere close to that man, who were sharing the sponsor panel with him and not agreeing with him at all. Like, it was not well stage managed, or it was rushed. I don't know how to describe it, but it was an interesting thing to see in the hearing. I don't know if you noticed this, Andrew, but I noticed it and thought it was kind of funny, you know, like, so.
Yeah. So another thing I wanted to ask you about, something that I really appreciated about our friendship and organizing over the years is our labor organizing. And, you know, you and your union at Hopkins of the grad workers and researchers, a couple of years ahead of the organizing I was doing with the first the part-time faculty and then the full-time faculty at community college where I work. So you'd be someone I'd call and we'd have, you know, 45-minute conversations about labor organizing strategy and that sort of thing. So I wanted to ask you about that, and if you could share with listeners what it was like to fight, you know, one of the wealthiest institutions in the state. I mean, really, you know, an organization that touts itself as one of the preeminent universities, research institutions in the world, and really being in the belly of that beast and building worker power. What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a long time. I've been at Hopkins for 7 years almost, and I think it's interesting because I'll ask a lot of people sort of why they got involved in our union. You know, I got involved at the beginning because I realized, hey, it's not as easy to do research as it should be at a place that is so well funded and such a leader in all of these different places. I struggle to pay my rent. So it's not very easy for me to just go to work and not have this added stress of I'm going to take on credit card debt to be able to make ends meet. And so someone had a conversation with me and they were like, hey, we should do something about this. And, you know, this for a long time, it was like 5 of us in a room and we'd be on a call like this, right? And we'd just be talking to each other about what are we going to do? Like, what's the plan? What's the strategy? All these kinds of conversations. And at a certain point, we were able to really get ourselves organized and say, we're going to actually just talk to everyone that works here. We then figured out it was 3,000 people that are in grad programs at Hopkins who also are paid to do research or teaching. And then we realized we had our work cut out for us. But I think it was sort of an example of the kind of deep organizing that can make big change. I mean, over the next few years after that, we were able to win a union. Over 2,000 people voted to join. And they were going in a secret ballot election, and over 2,000 of them went, and 67 of them voted no. So it was pretty clear.
90-something%, right?
97% of the voters voted yes, and that was 2/3 of everyone that works there in the grad union, basically. And so it was pretty clear that people needed change. And then we had to negotiate, right? We had to put people that just work there across the table from their bosses, and they had to confront them and say, this is what we need. And we found a way by which they would actually move. And it's not actually having access is the thing I really took away from this. It's not the opportunity to be in front of them that actually gets them to give you what you need, right? That's why they do these different councils, or, a lot of workplaces will have we'll do this meeting where you can air your grievances. And a lot of that is so that you feel like you're being listened to. But then when nothing actually happens. And so in this case, we were always organizing. We were always saying, you know what, if you don't want to give us an actual raise, then what if 500 of us spend an entire day picketing in front of the hospital, in front of the big sign that you do photo ops at? What if we go hand people, like the parents of the graduating seniors, flyers saying how bad their teachers are being treated? And so we did all of these things to really demonstrate that, like, when we're all united, we actually can make change. And that's why, the average raise was, 25%, tens of thousands of dollars for some people. I got like a $10,000 raise because of this, and that wouldn't have happened otherwise. And so I think it really goes to show how, like, just really building those relationships and solidifying the trust that you have in each other. These other people that I work with, we're not friends. Well, not all of them, right? I have some friends, but they're people that I see. They come from all walks of life. We differ politically, but what mattered is that we shared a common goal and decided we're going to work together to meet that common goal. And that's still happening now as well. There's a research staff union that just started their unionization process. They're also going to be fairly large. There's a lot of, it's big research universities, a lot of people that do the work. And so they're also signing up people to join a union. And it's in part because they were inspired by what we did. And also we want to help them. And a lot of us that are in the grad union are helping them. And we're coaching them through it. And we're taking those phone calls for 45 minutes where they're like, I don't know how to get through to this person. Because that's sort of what building up this movement is about. It's about really transcending these divides that were put in by the oligarchs, the billionaires. They want us divided. That's why they have this two-party system where they actually get to influence it all. It's all connected to the fact that they don't want all of us, the people that actually do the work, that are able to make everything run. They don't want us to have control of it. And so they're looking for any way that they can prevent that. And this is one way in the labor movement that I think we can really get past that and start to make real change. And I take a lot of examples from that in all the other organizing I do.
Yeah, I think that every time we talk about this, I'm so excited to hear the story of it. And I'll put the link to the YouTube or to the show we did, I think, in 2024, where you really went in depth about this process. We talked about the movement for grad student organizing. We talked about what you all did. It was right as I think you were at a major inflection point that you won, of course. And we'll put that in the show notes. And it's that type of experience that we think is super exciting and why we're so happy to have you coming on board as a person that's going to help us do the people organizing, because all of those lessons that you've learned are absolutely essential in kind of building the kind of movement that we need to challenge this oligarchic system. It's not the first campaign you've worked on. We worked together on Franca's campaign, Franca Mueller-Paz's campaign back in 2020. We've worked on some other things, but specifically Franca's campaign, because that was such an exciting, powerful, and outcome-changing campaign. Can you talk about that campaign, what your experience with it was like, and what you took away from that you'll be bringing into this work?
Yeah, I think that campaign was really, for me, an example of what it is we're trying to build outside of the two-party system, right? Franca ran as a Green in a general election in a deep blue city that has no Republicans ever competitive even in these elections, right? So it's really a one-party town. And what it took to get there was we had to convince a lot of people who are always voting Democrat, because that's sort of the only thing anyone does here, to say, you know what, that's not good enough. And that's not a thing we see in national politics at all, right? We reduce it down to, oh, well, you pick one of the two, and like that's all we get, and we just have to accept it. And the challenging that notion was really what this campaign did. I mean, it was so many different people across the city coming in to help support this campaign because they believed that something had to change. This was a Democrat who was an incumbent, had been around, like, near the levers of power for a long time, worked for the previous councilman, shared the name, ended up becoming the councilman. And we pulled off, quite a feat, raised a lot of money, especially for a general election and not a Democrat. we got over a third of the vote in that race, which crazy performance for also the same election in which Donald Trump was on the ballot. Like it's like really challenging this notion that like the only two choices are we got to go all the way down the ballot, one or the other. We have to really consider that local politics is and local and state politics is really a vessel for change, and it's one that we need to be using to really challenge people's preconceived notions about how the political system is supposed to work. And I think what I take most from that is sort of what I'm going to be bringing to this campaign is it was the deep relationships that we had with each other, right? Everyone on the campaign at least kind of knew everyone else, right? We had a lot of ways where people could actually meet each other. We had a lot of different events that a combination of virtual events, hybrid events, in-person events, right? We were up against the COVID pandemic, so we had to like get really creative with how we were going to build connection with people when most of them are staying home. And so it was sort of bringing these people together to say, we're going to find a way to make this work and actually build meaningful connections with each other. And a lot of those persist to this day. I'm friends with a lot of the people I worked with on that campaign. I'm here now, right? That was my gateway into the local Green Party. And so it's really the trust that people build makes it a lot easier to meet these common goals together. And sometimes we go common goal first and trust later. And then when we start having disagreements at the last minute, you start debating over what's the exact thing we're actually going to do. Sometimes it's too late. You can end up not finishing the job because the argument came pretty late and everyone is sort of thinking, oh, you're trying to change it last minute. And if we build that trust ahead of time and continually do it, we know that we're coming from a good place and we're able to have a better discussion. And so I think that's what I'm really bringing to this is building up those relationships that will allow us to really withstand what is a really difficult time. And especially when you're in an environment like this, you are challenging a system that is doing everything it can to stop you. And you have to have a good grounding in the people you're doing it with in order to really withstand that. And so that's the kind of culture I'm hoping to bring and provide some of the infrastructure. I'm only one person, but the idea would be that I get other people and then other people and then other people, and it branches out, right? That's really the way that this is always done. So yeah, that's what I hope to really bring.
Yeah, I think that it's really bring back a lot of good memories from 2020. And I think, I remember working with you on developing our safety protocol for, we were double masking and had face visors, and we're doing 6 feet, and we're distributing PPE on doors, before or better than a lot of other public facing entities were doing at that time. Right. And I saw you applying your scientific knowledge to organizing. And so, yeah, it brings back a lot of good memories, Andrew. But that was a council race, right? East Baltimore and parts of North Central Baltimore. Hopkins is big, but not as big in most respects as the state of Maryland. So what does people organizing mean for a campaign that is statewide? We're talking about a state with more than 6 million people, and how do we build real relationships, both as a campaign team, which we've been doing, but also at a state level.
Yeah. I mean, I've thought about this question a lot, especially as the time has come closer for me to actually start doing the job, because we've been talking about potentially doing it for a while. But I think it's what I've started to really think on lately is really relying on the personal relationship and the trust building being the center of it. And that applying not just to like, we have to have that built up with every person who volunteers for the campaign, but more realistically, we need to find those people that want to do something and are willing to build those relationships with people and sort of empower them and elevate them into positions of leadership themselves, right? This is a thing I did a lot in my union campaign. It's how I ended up working for Franca. I was volunteering first, and then she was like, "Will you actually want to do it as your job for a bit?" And it's like, it's not just about being leaders, it's about developing other leaders. That's what a real leader actually does. And so that's the kind of thinking I'm going into this with, is I'm I'm going to build relationships and I'm going to do as many as I can. But as one person, I'm also going to be looking for who is another person that I'm like, I think you are a person that has deep commitment, that I can build trust with, that I know will also go and find 5 more people to come knock on doors with you, or you're going to find 5 people to come to the farmer's market with you. And I'm going to say, I think you are that person. And I'm going to work with them to really build up those skills. It doesn't matter if you've done it before, right? I have no problem if this is your first time ever getting engaged at all politically, or the first time out of the 2 parties. I'm looking to work with you and to really develop that instinct that you have, and also to learn from you. I don't know everything. I've done a lot and I have experience in some things, but also a lot of this is going to be, I live in Baltimore City, and if you live in Charles County, I want you to tell me how this is going to work there, right? And I want to give you the tools to be able to go talk to your neighbors and to talk to people in your county, in your city, in your town, anywhere in the state. And so this isn't going to be, me coming in and now suddenly we're going to hit all the targets, right? It's going to be that I'm going to play a part in developing the kind of team that's going to be able to pull it off. And there's going to be a team, and it's going to need to be big. And so I look forward to doing that work and really building it up, because I think there's already a lot of really good people, and there's plenty more people across the state that they're looking for this. And when we find them, we'll be able to really give them those tools.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes me so excited. You're right. We've been talking about this for a very long time. It's been a conversation we've had. You've had this sort of minor matter of finishing your PhD at a world-class research institution. And so, we've been waiting until that happens, which is now happening very soon. And we're so excited that you're coming on board, because all of those experiences that you talk about are exactly what we need to take it to the next step at this point. Sometimes it can feel a little bit like this is a live stream and a research team and an advocacy team, but it has not yet had that place where it kicks in and starts engaging all the people who are interested. And in part, that's simply because Owen works a full-time job. I'm trying to get a business started. All of our other folks are workers, and are trying to do this as a second part of what they do. And so bringing folks like Andrew, who you're meeting tonight, and Seth, who came on a couple of weeks ago, on board in more of a role where they're able to do what they do as experts and have developed expertise in, will help us to expand the reach, will help us to expand and be on the ground in Charles County, be on the ground in Western Maryland. I would love it if we could be organizing people to go to that Hagerstown facility that they're building for ICE right now and be part of the protest. And we can't do it right now, and that's okay. It's okay that we can't do it, because that's a recognition of the limitations that we have. But adding somebody like you to the team who has this experience of mobilizing and organizing thousands of people is exactly what we need, at exactly the moment we need it. I can't wait for, once the ceremony's done and you catch up for all the time that it has taken you to finish a PhD at Johns Hopkins University. I can't wait for you to come on board. I'm so excited about it. And so can you say a little bit about, if people who are watching want to get involved, what does meaningful participation for them look like in this campaign? We've talked a little bit about it in an abstract, in a theoretical, and an organizing perspective. But what is somebody who's sitting out there watching this video and wants to get involved? How can they get involved? What does it look like? What are the tasks or steps or things that they would be doing today, tomorrow, or 270 days from now?
Yeah, I think there are going to be a lot of different options, and they're probably going to change as the campaign goes on. I think it's going to be, at the root of it, though, it is going to be, having conversations with your neighbors saying, hey, I'm volunteering with this campaign. Can you throw $5 so we can get public matching funds, right? I'd be happy to train you on how do you have that conversation, right? This is sort of providing the tools. But it really is going to be use those relationships that you have to move people to consider something different. It's going to be, hey, let's go get 5 of us when it warms up a little bit to the farmer's market. I would never put you out there in this weather. But like, sit there with a table and, people come up, or as they're walking by, say, hey, do you have a second? We're talking about how to build independent politics in Maryland. putting yourself out there, really. Another thing that you can do, if you're more introverted, I'm still going to try to get you to come out. I'm still going to try to get you to get out of your comfort zone. But I can also meet you where you're at. We can start out with, you know what, we got to text all of our donors and see if they could get us like an extra $5 for the next deadline. Or could we go through all the volunteers and could you email them and see if they'll come to this event, right? There's going to be a lot of ways to plug in, and I'm happy to really adapt it to where you're at. But also, we're going to have to become real comfortable with each other and challenge each other a little bit. And that's the kind of like growth-oriented mindset I'm hoping to bring. And I'm hoping that people will challenge me too, and tell me when it's like, hey, I don't like this. It's like, all right, I need to think through like, what are we going to be able to work out here? Because I need to hone my skills as well. But yeah, I mean, those are sort of some of the concrete examples. It could be emailing people, it could be texting people, it could be knocking on your neighbor's door. It could be calling your family that you live an hour from and being like, hey, you want to support this thing I'm doing? I'll give you the tools on how to have that conversation, how to start it. We can brainstorm. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of different ways to really plug in and contribute to the campaign.
Excellent. I can't wait. And, in a couple of weeks, we'll have you come back on once everything is set up and talk to people about how they can plug in actually and, how it's going and things like that. And if you have the time, we'd love to have you as a regular guest to update folks on the different efforts we have. I know you have a lot of ideas and we have a lot of ideas, and there's been a lot bubbling, and it's really great timing that as the weather is going to start to get warmer, you're going to be coming on in this role, because we're not going to drag anybody out in the 5-degree weather with all the snowcrete we have right now, but there will be a time when we're going to need folks out there, and it's going to be nice, and it'll be great to have you in the organizer role at that point. So, I'm very excited about it, and I'm eager to see what we can become, because I think we have done a great job of building the foundation, building the research base, building the policy base, building this show, building our advocacy, so that people can see we're serious about this. And the next step is to bring the people to the party, because that's how we grow, that's how we get bigger, and that's how we do the things we need to do. So. But I do have one last question before we go. So the last couple of years, we've gone to a lot of baseball games together. Some of those seasons have been really good for the Baltimore Orioles. Some of them have been not so good for the Baltimore Orioles. About half and half since we started going to games together. We've seen some playoff victory, some playoff baseball, some disappointing losses. Pitchers and catchers report in a couple of days. Opening day is next month. What's your take on what the Orioles are going to be like this year?
Look, I see a playoff win this year. I'm not saying how deep, but I could see something happen. They got a chip on their shoulder after the last few years. So, I could see it happening where they, maybe they squeak in the wild card, have a rough patch in the season. I'm sure that'll happen. I've seen it before. But, I'm feeling good. I think they have recognized that they've come up short and have really thought about it. And there's some new pieces coming in that I think could really contribute. So, I'm gonna throw it out here now. A playoff series win.
Yeah. I will just throw it out there and say, I believe this is the year. I believe the Orioles magic. I believe it every year, but this year I believe it too. And I believe in that Orioles magic. I believe that this is going to be the time that we bring that trophy back, and we're going to raise so much money that we have an ad on during the World Series that is like, vote for Owen and Andy, because they're the ones who believe in you, believe in the people, and believe in the Orioles. And then we're going to ride that World Series victory right into the election, and show everybody that the impossible can come true right here in Baltimore and right here in Maryland. So we'll see. You're laughing now, and I imagine that at some point you'll be like, remember when you said this is going to be the year we win all of it? And I'm gonna be like, I did say that, I did. But I like your approach. One playoff win, somewhere between one playoff win and winning the whole thing. I'll take any of that. So
right. I'm happy to be wrong.
Yeah, I I'm happy to be right. I'd love it if this is the year that we get to have that. We get to have that parade here, the Orioles magic blasting from the boombox, and everything going, turning up orange and black. So, Owen, anything before we let Andrew go?
Yep. Thanks so much for joining us. Looking forward to organizing with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Keep up the excellent work. We can't wait to have you officially join. Great preview of it tonight. And congratulations on finishing your PhD. It's a real accomplishment at an institution that doesn't make it easy, especially when you had to fight so hard in order to be able to pay your bills and to have your fellow workers pay their bills. But that's good work, and you're graduating with the PhD, and we're really happy for you. Congratulations, and we can't wait for you to join us.
Yeah, proud of you, dude.
Thank you. All right, so another awesome member of our team, connecting the work that they do to organize to what they're going to do when they're on our team. I'm very excited about this interview. I was sad we didn't get to do it last week, but Andrew and I, when you said you weren't feeling well last week, Andrew and I thought it was real important for the three of us to have this conversation instead of just having two of us have it. And I'm so excited that we did. I can't wait to see him graduate. I also can't wait to see him be on the team and bring that real solid organizing experience to the work we do. And it couldn't come at a better time. So I'm thrilled about it. And I can't wait to see the awesome things that we're going to do.
Yeah, definitely. And if, Andrew's story resonates with you, we want you on this team, and, go to gogreen2026.com. You can sign up to volunteer there. And when Andrew defends his dissertation, he'll be ready to organize you get more involved with the campaign. You can also chip in and donate to help support his salary and Seth and other folks who are working on the campaign, getting paid a decent wage for their labor. So, please check out the website for that.
Yeah, totally. And I want to be real clear about this. Like, we can accomplish a whole lot this year. Things are lining up properly for us. Larry Hogan dropped out. Dan Cox is running. Wes Moore is taking positions that might be really unpopular with a large section of the grassroots left. And we have a real opportunity to do something that is transformative right now, that has an impact on what happens in this state and in this country for decades to come. I don't say that just to get you to donate. I say that to help understand the reason why we need some resources right now, so that we can pay these folks to do the great work that they've spent their life developing and the skills that they have, so that we can bring them to this and really take advantage of the political moment that we have. The stars are aligning for us. The Orioles are going to win the World Series. We're going to qualify for public financing. And we're going to have the best third-party campaign in Maryland since Reconstruction. And we're going to begin a process that allows us to build the Maryland we deserve. That's what's at stake right now. That's what's happening. That's why we come on this show every week to talk about it. And that's why we can't wait to bring some of the best people we know onto the team in order to help make it happen. There's a real chance that to do the thing that feels impossible, to break down the two-party system, to create a humane politics, and to create a community of folks who are committed to doing it in the best way possible, which is by building independent power outside of the corporations and outside of the two parties. And right now is the best time to get to work, to join the team, and to get engaged. And I can't wait for the next 271 days. They're going to be hard. They're going to be difficult and cold and hot and all that stuff at times, but there's an opportunity to do something really unique here, and I think we're right on the verge of starting to see it come every single day. So
yep. Go green,
go in 2026, go Orioles. Please chip in, please donate, please tell your friends to watch this show, please follow us on social media, and we'll see you next week.